When I opened the door and walked in, the house was quiet, too quiet. Grace wasn't humming in the kitchen, as she often did when she got home from work before me. The smell of dinner wasn't lingering in the air. Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, her posture stiff, like someone waiting for judgment. "Hey," I said, tossing my keys on the counter. "Everything okay?" Grace's smile was tight, forced, a poor imitation of the easy grin I'd grown used to. "We need to talk." My gut twisted. Nothing good ever came from those 4 words. I had expected the routine, but this was different. The air in the room felt thick, like something unsaid was clogging the oxygen. I sat down across from her. "All right, what's on your mind?" She glanced away for a moment, gathering herself, then locked eyes with me. "Brandon, I've been seeing someone." I blinked, trying to process the words, but they landed like a brick to the chest. "Seeing someone?" I could feel the weight of the statement sinking in, pressing down hard, but I didn't move, didn't flinch. The years of sitting in negotiation rooms, keeping my cool under pressure, kicked in. "What do you mean you've been seeing someone?" She exhaled sharply, as if relieved the words were finally out. "His name is Derek." It's not like I want to leave you or anything. I need something different." I stared at her, trying to grasp what the hell she was saying. She wasn't just dropping the bomb. She was acting like this was somehow normal, acceptable, reasonable. "You need something different?" My voice came out calm, almost too calm considering what I was feeling. "So, what? You thought you'd go find it with someone else?" Grace shifted in her seat, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the table. "It's not like that, Brandon. I still love you, but I cut her off. "Still love me? You're sitting here telling me you're screwing someone else, and I'm supposed to believe you still love me?" She bit her lip, visibly torn, but kept pressing forward. I need more. It's not about us, it's about me. About what I need sometimes. I was hoping you'd understand." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her like I'd never seen her before. "So, let me get this straight. You want to stay married to me, but also sleep with him. Is that what you're saying?" Grace's eyes darted to the side, the first crack in her composure. "I know it sounds bad, but it doesn't have to change anything between us. I don't want to hide anything from you. I thought if I was honest, we could figure something out." I stood up, needing the distance, needing to move away from this conversation that felt like a bad dream. "And this guy, Derek, does he know you're still married? Does he know you're pitching this open relationship crap to your husband?" Her silence was answer enough. I paced to the sink, gripping the edge hard enough that my knuckles went white. "You're asking me to let you sleep with another man. What the hell made you think I'd be okay with that?" Grace flinched at the edge in my voice. "It's not like I don't care about you, Brandon. You just want your cake and eat it too," I shot back. "This doesn't mess up your little fantasy life, right? You get to have me here, loyal, supportive, while you run off to screw Derek whenever the mood strikes." She looked down at her hands, the shame creeping into her expression for the first time. "It wouldn't change us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Jesus Christ, Grace, you don't even believe that." She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. Not now. Not when my world was flipping upside down in the span of 5 minutes. "Have you already made plans? Is that where this is headed?" I demanded, feeling the anger rise, sharp and cutting. She hesitated, then nodded, just a tiny dip of her head, but it was enough. "This weekend." My stomach turned. "So, you've planned this out? A little getaway with Derek?" Grace looked up, pleading in her eyes now, but it was far too late for that. "I thought you might come around to it. I was going to talk to you more. I didn't expect this to be so hard." I stood there, absorbing the audacity of what she was asking. She had already made her choice. This weekend, she'd already set her path, made her bed, and yet, she sat there acting as if this was some negotiation, like I had a say in how this was going to play out. "Grace," I said, voice low but firm, "if you go through with this, if you walk out that door with him this weekend, we're done. There's no coming back from this." She opened her mouth again, to argue, to convince me, but I held up a hand. "I'll need time to think about all this. But don't assume I'll be waiting around for you when you come back." Her face fell as I turned, heading for the stairs. I paused at the doorway, my back still turned to her. I needed to know, even though I already did. You're texting him right now, aren't you? The silence behind me was louder than anything she could have said. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I went upstairs, grabbed my things, and made my way to the guest room, the sound of her phone tapping away still echoing faintly behind me. But in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't just hurt, wasn't just blindsided by her betrayal. I was angry, and the anger was settling into something colder, more calculated. She thought she could have both, thought I'd let her carry on like this without consequences. The next morning, I woke up before Grace. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the guest room, the cool air from the window brushing over my face. The events of the previous night had settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but I wasn't about to drown in it. I wasn't the kind of man who let things like this fester without action. Grace had made her move, and now it was my turn. I got up quietly, careful not to disturb her as I crossed the hall into our shared office. I closed the door behind me and sat at my desk, the soft glow of the computer screen lighting up the room. First things first, Grace and I had joint savings, but after her little bombshell, I wasn't about to let her get her hands on that without my say. If she thought she could waltz off with another man and still play house when it suited her, she was in for a rude awakening. Logging into the bank's website, I transferred a sizable chunk of our savings into a separate account, one she had no access to. Just a precaution, I told myself. Something told me that whatever Grace was planning with Derek wasn't just a passing fling. There was something deeper in this, something I needed to uncover before it spiraled any further. Once the money was safely stowed away, I leaned back, tapping my fingers on the desk, thinking. I couldn't just sit idly by and let her run off to Austin with this guy. I needed proof, evidence, and more than just overheard conversations. If I was going to turn this situation to my advantage, I had to know every detail of their little arrangement. An idea began to form, a plan, methodical, precise, and exactly what was needed. I wasn't going to react with blind anger. I was going to outsmart them both. I spent the next hour researching surveillance equipment. I didn't need anything too elaborate, just enough to get the job done. A few voice-activated recorders, a GPS tracker, and a couple of small hidden cameras would do the trick. Discreet, reliable, and easy to place without raising suspicion. By the time Grace woke up, I had already made my purchases, choosing same-day delivery. As she moved around the house, pretending everything was fine, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. She was completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. She probably thought I'd mope around, maybe get angry, and eventually accept her twisted version of reality. But I wasn't that kind of man. Not anymore. Do you have any plans for today? Grace asked as she sipped her coffee, standing by the kitchen counter. She didn't even look at me when she said it, her eyes trained on her phone, likely waiting for another message from Derek. Not much, I replied casually. Just taking the day off to think things through. She nodded, as if that explanation satisfied her. No further questions, no concern. She was too wrapped up in whatever fantasy she had with Derek to notice that the wheels were already turning on my side. Once Grace left for work, I sprang into action. The first delivery arrived in the afternoon. Small packages that looked harmless enough, wrapped in plain brown paper. I opened them carefully, checking the equipment to make sure everything was functional. The GPS tracker was small, about the size of a matchbox, perfect for slipping into the lining of Grace's car. The recorders were sleek and unobtrusive, ideal for placing around the house and in her vehicle. I started with the car. Grace's SUV was parked in the driveway, and I slipped outside, taking a casual glance around the neighborhood to make sure no one was watching. The tracker went into the trunk, tucked into the spare tire compartment. It wouldn't be easily found, and it would give me real-time updates on where she was headed. Next, I installed one of the recorders under the driver's seat, taping it securely to the underside. If Grace made any calls in the car, I'd know. Her conversations with Derek would be captured in full detail. Another recorder went in the bedroom, carefully hidden behind the bookshelf where she always tossed her phone at night. No corner of her life was going to remain private after this. The final piece of the puzzle was her phone. I couldn't risk leaving anything to chance, so I used spyware I'd gotten access to online. Simple enough to install when you know how. All it took was a few minutes with her phone, and I had everything I needed: access to her text messages, emails, and GPS location. By the time she got home that evening, I had full control of the situation without her knowing a thing. It was all there: the texts, the call logs, and worst of all, their plans for the weekend. They were staying at a luxury boutique hotel in Austin, one I knew all too well. Chase had picked the best room, of course, complete with all the amenities. Grace seemed giddy with excitement in her messages, going on about how she couldn't wait for their getaway. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. She was gone. Whatever fantasy life she'd built with me had crumbled, and now she was chasing some cheap thrill with Derek, all the while expecting me to sit back and take it. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I combed through her emails, something else caught my eye, something more sinister. Grace had a separate account, one I hadn't known about. A private account where she'd been funneling money from her real estate deals, money that should have gone into our joint investments. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally, she was stealing from me. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Every discovery added a new layer to my plan, a new angle for me to exploit. Grace thought she could manipulate me, keep me in the dark while she planned her little escape. But now, I had all the leverage I needed. She had no idea what she was walking into. The next step had to be clean, precise. Grace was spiraling deeper into her own web of lies, and I had more than enough to take her down. But the affair itself, the stolen money, it wasn't enough for me. There was something colder brewing inside me. A need to make sure she and Derek felt every inch of the damage they'd done. Not just a slap on the wrist, but something that would shatter the lives they were so arrogantly flaunting. I sat in my office again, the soft light of the computer screen washing over my face as I dialed the number. I had thought long and hard about this next move, weighing my options, considering every angle. There was only one name that kept coming up in my head. I needed someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't just help me untangle this mess, but someone who would ensure that I came out victorious, that we came out victorious with Derek and Grace left licking their wounds. Jessica Palmer's office. A sharp voice answered on the other end. "Brandon Harris," I replied smoothly. "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Jessica. Tell her it's about adultery and assets. She'll understand." There was a pause, likely as the receptionist checked Jessica's availability. "She has an opening at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Would that work for you?" "Perfect. I'll be there." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. Jessica Palmer wasn't just any divorce lawyer. She was a shark, the kind of lawyer who didn't care about playing fair as long as her client won. I had heard about her before, and I knew what she could do. She was exactly the kind of person I needed. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in her downtown office, a sleek, modern space that screamed success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Dallas skyline, and the walls were lined with framed newspaper articles and awards. Jessica herself was as sharp as her reputation. Early 40s, immaculately dressed, with a demeanor that told you she didn't take any nonsense. "Brandon," she said, extending her hand as I entered her office. "I've heard a bit about your situation. Let's talk." We sat down, and I laid it all out for her: Grace's affair, the texts, the hidden accounts, the weekend plans in Austin. I didn't leave out a single detail. Jessica listened carefully, occasionally nodding, but mostly silent, absorbing every word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. "You have plenty of leverage here. Texas is one of the few states where adultery is still legally relevant in divorce proceedings. We can easily file on those grounds, and you're likely to come out with a significant financial advantage, especially if we can prove Grace has been misappropriating funds from your joint assets." I nodded, but she wasn't finished. "But I think there's more we can do here. You mentioned the name Derek Stone." I raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" Her lips curled into a slight smile, one that made it clear she knew exactly who Derek was. "Oh, I know Derek. And I know he's been very careless lately, using his firm's resources for personal gain. That hotel booking? He did that through his company's corporate account." That little nugget of information hit me like a surge of adrenaline. I hadn't even considered that angle. "So, what are you thinking?" Jessica's eyes gleamed with a calculating glint. "We go for the jugular. Not just divorce, We sued Derek for alienation of affection. It's an old legal strategy, but it still holds weight in Texas. You're the injured party, Brandon, and Derek has interfered in your marriage. That gives us grounds to hit him where it hurts, his wallet and his reputation. I sat back, letting the idea sink in. I hadn't even considered suing Derek. Sure, I wanted him to suffer, but this could ruin him. And how does that play out? I asked, intrigued. If we win, and with the evidence you've gathered, it's very likely we will, he'll have to compensate you financially. We can go after a significant amount. But more importantly, we'll expose him. This kind of lawsuit is public. His firm will get wind of it. And when they find out he's been using company resources to fund his little affair, they'll cut him loose faster than you can imagine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction growing inside me. This was exactly what I wanted. No needed. Grace and Derek had thought they could hide this, that their actions would have no consequences. But now, they'd face a storm they never saw coming. What's the next step? I asked. Jessica pulled out a notepad, jotting down details as she spoke. First, we file the divorce papers. We could do that immediately on grounds of adultery. Then, I'll start preparing the alienation of affection case against Derek. But there's more we can do, Brandon. If we can prove Derek has been using his firm's resources for personal gain, like that hotel reservation, I can leverage that information to blow this entire thing wide open. His firm will want to cover its own ass, and they won't hesitate to throw Derek to the wolves. The wheels in my mind were spinning now. Jessica wasn't just giving me a path to victory. She was laying out a full-scale attack. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about bringing down everyone who had played a part in it. And Grace? I asked, what happens to her in all this? Jessica smiled again. That same predatory smile. We'll make sure she's left with nothing. Between the divorce and the fact that she's been siphoning off funds, we'll ensure she walks away with as little as possible. You'll have the upper hand financially, legally, and publicly. This will be messy for her, Brandon. Very messy. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. Grace had thought she could walk all over me, that she could have her affair and still come back to the safety of our marriage. But now, the tables had turned. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I was going to destroy everything she had built with Derek, piece by piece. As I stood to leave, Jessica handed me a folder. Inside are the initial documents for the divorce. I'll file them first thing tomorrow morning. You're already one step ahead with the evidence you've gathered. Now it's just about playing the long game. I took the folder, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was it, the beginning of the end. Thanks, Jessica, I said, meeting her gaze. I'm ready. She nodded, that cool professionalism never leaving her face. I'll be in touch soon. Don't worry, Brandon. You're in good hands. I walked out of her office with a newfound sense of purpose. I arrived in Austin on Friday morning, earlier than expected. The drive had been quiet, almost eerily so, as if the universe was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I checked into the hotel, the very same one Grace and Derek had their weekend getaway planned at. The irony wasn't lost on me. The clerk at the front desk didn't bat an eye as I gave my name. Why would she? To her, I was just another guest, but to me, this was the final act of a carefully crafted plan. The room they had booked was on the 6th floor, a corner suite with views of the city skyline. Perfect. I walked through the hotel lobby, my mind already running through the steps I needed to take. I had given Jessica everything she needed to start the legal ball rolling, but now it was time for the other part of my plan to fall into place, the part Grace and Derek wouldn't see coming. Once inside the suite, I wasted no time. The hidden cameras I had purchased were small, nearly invisible, and would give me everything I needed. I placed one in the bedroom, tucked discreetly into the air vent facing the bed. Another in the living area, behind a lamp, angled perfectly toward the couch. The bathroom was trickier, but I managed to secure one behind the mirror, its wide lens covering the entire space. There was no chance they'd notice them, not with how wrapped up they'd be in each other. Satisfied with the setup, I pulled out the folder Jessica had given me. Inside were printed copies of their hotel reservation, Derek's company perks account details, and even the charge for the romantic weekend package he'd booked. All of it neatly stacked and ready to be used in court. I slid the folder into the drawer of the nightstand, knowing that if I played my cards right, this weekend would give me everything I needed to turn the knife just a little deeper. But I wasn't finished yet. As I waited, I made a call to a private investigator I had hired earlier in the week. His name was Todd, a man with enough street smarts and connections to get the kind of dirt you couldn't find online. We had arranged to meet up in the hotel bar, away from prying eyes. When I walked in, Todd was already seated, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the high-end clientele that filled the lounge. "You got everything set up?" Todd asked, not wasting any time on pleasantries. I nodded. "Everything's in place. They'll be here later tonight, and I need full coverage. I want every move they make documented." Todd grinned, taking a sip of his whiskey. "You've got it, man. I've got a guy who'll be stationed just outside. He's done work like this before, so no worries. We'll get the photos, the timestamps, everything." I leaned back, the weight of the moment sinking in. "Good. And make sure to get plenty of shots of them in public. I want this to blow up in their faces. Trust me, it'll be cleaner than a crime scene. You'll have what you need by Sunday." With that, Todd gave me a nod and left, leaving me alone in the bar. I ordered a drink, but I barely touched it. My mind was elsewhere, always 2 steps ahead, calculating the moves, the timing, the outcome. This wasn't just about catching Grace and Derek in the act anymore. It was about hitting them from every angle. I checked the time. They'd be arriving soon. That evening, I made my way back up to the room, checking the camera feeds one more time from my laptop. Everything was running smoothly. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with anticipation. It was almost too perfect, the way it was all falling into place. Grace had no idea that her betrayal was about to be laid bare in the most public way possible. I watched the feed for hours, the camera in the lobby showing the steady stream of guests checking in and out. And then, just after 7 p.m., there they were, Grace and Derek, walking through the front doors like any other couple. She was smiling, her hand on his arm, as if they didn't have a care in the world. They were so wrapped up in their little bubble of deceit that they didn't notice a thing. Not the subtle click of Todd's photographer's camera as he snapped photo after photo from a distance. Not the knowing looks from the staff who probably wondered why a woman in her late 30s was sneaking into a hotel with a man who wasn't her husband. I watched as they checked in, Derek handling everything with the desk clerk. He was smooth, I'll give him that. He had a way of making everything seem normal, effortless, like nothing could touch him. But that calm, collected exterior wouldn't last. I kept my eye on the live feed as they took the elevator up, stepping out on the 6th floor. It felt strange, seeing Grace like this, her arm linked with his, walking the halls as if this was all some romantic escape. I clenched my fists, but I didn't let the anger consume me. That would come later, when the real fallout hit. They entered the suite, and I watched them settle in. Drinks were poured, laughter filled the room. Grace leaned in, whispering something into Derek's ear that made him smile, his hand resting on her thigh. I forced myself to remain calm. I couldn't get distracted now, not when I was so close. The cameras were doing their job, capturing every touch, every word, every movement. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more trick up my sleeve. On Saturday morning, just after they left for brunch, I made another call, this time to a local tabloid photographer I'd hired to follow them around Austin. His job was simple, catch them in public looking as much like a couple as possible. And he did exactly that. By noon, I had a set of photos waiting in my inbox, Grace and Derek, arm in arm, walking down Congress Avenue like they were on some kind of vacation. The photographer even managed to snap a few close-ups, and I could see the glint of Derek's wedding ring on his finger. The man didn't even bother taking it off. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Derek's whole life was about to go down in flames, and he didn't even see it coming. I forwarded the photos to Todd with instructions to leak them to a small celebrity gossip site, the kind that specializes in scandals and secrets. Within hours, the photos were online, spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just Grace and Derek's little weekend anymore. It was a public spectacle. Anyone with half a brain could connect the dots. Grace was cheating, and Derek was a married man in deep trouble. And the best part? The legal community in Austin wasn't exactly large. Word would get back to Derek's firm soon enough. By the time they finished their little tryst, they'd both be walking into a storm they couldn't escape. Saturday morning arrived, and everything was in motion. From my suite, I watched them through the live feed as they lay lazily in bed, Derek's hand resting on Grace's hip like they had all the time in the world. They had no idea that their perfect little weekend was crumbling from the inside out. Every move they made was being documented. Every step they took outside was being captured and sent straight to the tabloid site. They'd been publicly outed, but the humiliation wasn't over yet. I was just getting started. I made sure to get up early, knowing they'd want room service at some point in the morning. After all, Derek had booked the romantic weekend package. The staff here didn't spare any expense when it came to keeping guests happy. I placed a call to the hotel's front desk and requested a bottle of champagne be delivered to their suite. It was simple, easy, a gesture any thoughtful partner might make. The only difference was the twist I'd added, a small, tasteless dose of laxatives mixed into the bottle, courtesy of an online source I'd researched beforehand. Nothing dangerous, just enough to ruin whatever romantic plans they had left. The bottle was delivered just as they were getting back from brunch, their faces flushed from the late morning sun. Grace giggled as she stepped into the room, Derek's arm wrapped possessively around her waist. I could see it all through the cameras, my laptop propped open on the desk in my suite. I watched as Derek uncorked the bottle with a flourish, pouring 2 glasses while Grace slipped into the bathroom to freshen up. I couldn't help but smirk as I saw him take a sip, completely unaware of what was coming. He leaned back on the couch, looking far too pleased with himself. A few moments later, Grace joined him, dressed in one of those delicate little robes she loved, probably the same one she used to wear for me. They clinked glasses, laughing, drinking, savoring the moment as if they had all the time in the world. It wouldn't last. I sat back, waiting, knowing what would come next. Not half an hour passed before I saw Derek shift uncomfortably on the couch. His expression flickered, a slight grimace as he rubbed his stomach. He stood up, pacing for a moment, before abruptly heading toward the bathroom. Grace didn't seem to notice at first, still lost in whatever dreamy nonsense she was telling herself about this little affair. But when Derek didn't come back right away, she frowned, setting her glass down and heading toward the bathroom door. Through the camera, I could hear muffled voices, Grace's confusion growing. "Derek? You okay in there?" The door opened, and Derek came out looking pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He was trying to play it cool, but it was obvious he was struggling. He muttered something about not feeling well, and Grace's frown deepened as she touched his arm. Maybe it was the food. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the tension rise. He excused himself again, this time bolting for the bathroom without a word. Grace stood there, puzzled, until a sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Perfect timing. Grace opened the door to find a bellboy standing there, holding a massive bouquet of lilies. Her favorite. The look of surprise on her face quickly faded into something more confused as she took the bouquet and read the note attached to it. From where the camera was positioned, I couldn't see the exact expression on her face, but I knew it well enough. Her posture stiffened, and she stared at the note for a long time, frozen in place. The note was simple. "From your loving husband." The psychological jab landed right where I wanted it to. She knew now, knew that I was watching, that I was aware of every sordid detail of her little affair. And just like that, her perfect weekend was no longer a secret. She set the flowers down abruptly, almost knocking over the vase as she paced the room. The air had shifted. Her nerves were visible even on the small screen of my laptop. She began glancing around, looking for something, anything that might explain how I knew. She didn't know about the cameras, of course. She couldn't possibly guess how far ahead I was. But she was starting to understand. That was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Derek was still in the bathroom, and the discomfort on his face when he finally emerged told me the champagne was doing its job. He was sweating now, clearly trying to mask the embarrassment, but failing. Grace barely noticed him. She was too preoccupied with the flowers, the note, the sinking realization that her husband wasn't some clueless fool waiting at home. She glanced at her phone, probably wondering if I'd call, if I'd confront her. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted her to stew in it a little longer. I could have ended it there, but there was more to do. Later that afternoon, when they ventured out for a walk, I made another move. Using the connections I had gathered through Todd, I got hold of Derek's law firm's partner's email address. I didn't hesitate, sending a handful of the most damning photos directly to the partner, including the ones that had surfaced on the gossip site. Derek was about to have more than just his personal life unravel. I kept it anonymous, of course, but the message was clear. This is the man representing your firm. It wasn't just about breaking up Grace's fantasy anymore. Derek's entire career was now hanging by a thread, and I just handed the scissors to his superiors. By evening, I could see the strain between them. They barely spoke during dinner, Derek's stomach still clearly giving him trouble while Grace looked distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. The tension between them was palpable, and I knew that when they left Austin, they wouldn't be returning as the carefree couple they thought they were. Derek had bigger problems now. Grace's little fling had turned into a full-blown disaster, and it was only a matter of time before the fallout landed squarely in their laps. I had delivered the humiliation they both deserved, but this wasn't just about ruining their weekend. This was about making sure they never forgot the consequences of their choices. The drive back from Austin was long, and for the first time in days, I wasn't in a rush. I could have taken the shorter route, but I chose the scenic path, letting the miles stretch on while the weight of what I had set in motion settled over me. I wasn't just returning home. I was walking into the last act of something that had consumed every corner of my life. There was no more uncertainty, no more waiting to see how things would play out. Everything was in place. The chessboard had been flipped over, and there was only one winner left standing. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the house looked different somehow. Still the same house, the same yard, but it felt hollow. The last remnants of what Grace and I had built were waiting to be packed away, and it wasn't just the furniture or the belongings. It was the life we'd shared, the plans we'd made. And now, they were reduced to a few suitcases and a pile of papers. I walked inside, the cold silence of the house greeting me. I had been in touch with Jessica throughout the weekend, keeping her updated on everything that had transpired. The photos, the videos, the texts, all the evidence was ready to be filed. Grace was about to walk into a storm she hadn't prepared for, and Derek's problems were just beginning. I had already packed Grace's things, leaving the bags by the door. Everything she had left in this house, every piece of her life, was now nothing more than a footnote in our shared history. The divorce papers were neatly laid out on the coffee table, waiting for her to see them the moment she walked through that door. I didn't have to wait long. I heard her car pull up, the tires crunching against the gravel, and I stood in the living room, my back to the window. For a second, I wondered what was going through her mind. Did she think this was salvageable? Did she believe that after everything, we could still go back to how things were before? The door opened, and Grace stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She froze the moment she saw the bags, her eyes darting from them to me. For a moment, there was only silence between us. Brandon, her voice was quiet, almost unsure, as if she already knew something was terribly wrong. I turned to face her, my expression calm but firm. I thought you want to get a head start on packing. She stared at the bags, her confusion morphing into something else. Fear, realization, maybe even guilt. Well, what is this? Why are my things packed? I stepped closer, my voice steady and cold. Because you're leaving, Grace. I've already filed for divorce. Your things are packed, and the papers are right there on the table. It's over. Her eyes widened as she took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the wall as if the ground beneath her had just shifted. You filed for divorce? Just like that. I didn't flinch. What did you expect, Grace? That I'd wait around while you had your fun? That I'd stand by while you played house with Derek? Her face paled at the mention of his name, and she shook her head, desperate to find some kind of defense. It wasn't like that, Brandon. You don't get to explain. I cut her off, my voice hard now. I know everything, Grace. I know about the weekend. I know about the money you've been funneling into your secret account. I know every detail. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was unraveling, and I wasn't about to stop it. Your accounts are frozen, I continued. Every cent you try to hide from me, it's gone. I've taken control of all of it. You'll be left with nothing. Her hands trembled as she stepped toward me, her eyes pleading now. "Brandon, please. We could talk about this." No, Grace. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice, and now you'll live with it." Her breath hitched, tears welling up in her eyes as she glanced at the divorce papers on the table. "You're really doing this? After everything we've been through?" I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. "You did this, Grace. Not me." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression a mixture of disbelief and regret. But it was too late for that now. I had given her more chances than she deserved, and she had thrown them all away for someone who wasn't worth it. Her phone buzzed in her purse, pulling her out of the moment. She fumbled for it, glancing at the screen, her face crumpling as she read whatever message had just come through. I knew what it was. Derek's world had just started collapsing too. "I hope that's Derek," I said, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "Because I'm sure he's having a worse day than you are." She looked up, her face pale as she shook her head, unable to comprehend what I meant. "What did you do?" I took a step closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "I sent your little photos from the weekend to his law firm, and I filed a lawsuit against him for alienation of affection. His career is over, Grace. You didn't just lose me. You lost everything." Her eyes widened, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. Derek had been her escape, her way out, and now he was crumbling just as fast as she was. I stepped back, giving her space to absorb it all. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling as she buried her face in them. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, broken only by the occasional buzz of her phone as the fallout continued to unfold in real time. I didn't bother saying anything more. There was nothing left to say. By the time she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, her expression hollow. "What happens now?" I pointed to the papers on the table. "You sign those. Then you leave. And don't come back." She stared at the papers for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had no fight left. She knew there was no salvaging this. Without another word, she picked up the pen and signed, her hand shaking as she scrawled her name across the dotted lines. When she was done, she set the pen down and stood, her movements robotic, lifeless. She gathered her things, her eyes avoiding mine as she made her way to the door. For a brief moment, she hesitated, turning to look at me one last time. There was something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or perhaps the realization of just how badly she had miscalculated. But I didn't respond. I simply watched her go, the door closing softly behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of what had once been our home. I sat down, the papers in front of me, feeling the weight of finality settle over the room. It was done. Grace was gone, and everything I had planned had fallen into place. My phone buzzed. It was Jessica, confirming that everything was moving forward with the alienation of affection lawsuit. Derek's firm had already started the process of distancing themselves from him, and it wouldn't be long before the scandal blew up completely. I smiled to myself, a strange sense of calm settling in. I wasn't just free, I had won. That evening, I met Jessica for dinner. It was quiet, simple, but as we talked over the meal, I could feel the weight lifting. This was the beginning of something new, something that wasn't tainted by betrayal or lies. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.